Welcome to a world where powerful empires with armies, gold, and literal gods on their side somehow manage to self-destruct in the dumbest ways possible. Yeah, this is 25 dumbest decisions that destroyed entire empires, and they thought it was a good idea. Grab a drink. You're about to lose faith in human decision-making. We start at number 1. With a move so stupid, it turned one of the most feared armies in history into a meme: Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812. Picture this. The world's most brilliant general, undefeated across Europe, decides to march his massive army straight into Russia in winter. You can already hear the boss music. Napoleon brings 600,000 men, expecting to crush the Tsar in a few weeks. Instead, he gets snow, starvation, and frostbite. Russia pulls a classic you can't lose if you just burn your cities and run away. Move the scorched earth strategy. By the time Napoleon realizes Moscow's empty and on fire, it's too late. Winter hits, supply lines collapse, and soldiers are eating their horses just to survive. Out of 600,000 men, fewer than 100,000 make it home. And guess what? Napoleon thought it was a minor setback. Genius move, Emperor. At number 2, we've got an empire that literally paid for its own destruction, the Spanish Empire. In the 1500s, Spain struck gold, literally. The Americas were pouring silver and gold into their treasury. You'd think that meant endless wealth, right? Nope. Spain used all that treasure to buy stuff from other countries. And when everyone realized Spain's gold was flooding the market, prices skyrocketed. The Spanish crown went bankrupt 4 times. They spent more on wars than they could ever earn, especially the disastrous Armada against England in 1588. Imagine betting your entire empire on a weather forecast and losing. Spain's mighty ships were crushed by storms and English cannons, turning the invincible Armada into the invincible wreckage. They thought gold was infinite. Turns out, stupidity is. Now, number 3, and this one hurts: the fall of the Aztec Empire. Brought to you by overconfidence and smallpox. When Hernán Cortés and a few hundred Spaniards showed up, Emperor Moctezuma thought they were literal gods. Instead of destroying the invaders, he welcomed them into the capital, fed them, and showed them where all the gold was. Spoiler: that was not the right move. Cortés took Moctezuma hostage, chaos erupted, and soon smallpox wiped out entire cities. Within 2 years, an empire of millions fell to a few hundred conquistadors and a virus. The Aztecs thought they were hosting divine guests. They were hosting their own extinction party. At number 4, we're heading east to the Byzantine Empire and their spectacular fail known as the Fourth Crusade in 1204. You'd think a crusade would be about fighting Muslims in the Holy Land? Nope. The Crusaders got sidetracked and decided to sack Constantinople, a Christian city. They looted everything: libraries, churches, even the emperor's underwear, probably. Venice, the sneaky mastermind behind it all, made bank. The Byzantines never recovered. That single decision to let foreign armies pass through their territory doomed them. Constantinople limped along for another 250 years, but the empire was effectively toast. They literally paid people to burn their own capital. End Devon X's diplomatic strategy. Coming in hot at number 5, the Ming dynasty's "we don't need the ocean" policy. In the early 1400s, China had the biggest navy in the world, Admiral Zheng. His treasure fleet had ships the size of football fields, sailing all the way to Africa. Then the Ming court decided, nah, exploring is for peasants, and burned the entire fleet. They outlawed overseas trade, isolated themselves, and destroyed the ship blueprints like deleting your only backup file of the future. Meanwhile, tiny Portugal went, cool, guess we'll take the world then, and started the global age of exploration. The Ming thought they were protecting tradition. What they actually did was hand over world domination on a silver platter to Europe. 5 empires down, 20 to go. And trust me, the next ones make these guys look like strategic geniuses. Because when it comes to dumb decisions, humanity never disappoints. Alright, we've already seen empires freeze, burn, and bankrupt themselves, but trust me, we're only warming up. Because number 6 is what happens when a literal god king makes decisions based on flattery. Meet Pharaoh Akhenaten, ruler of Egypt, husband of Nefertiti, and inventor of the "let's change every religion overnight" speedrun. Around 1350 BCE, this guy decided there were too many gods in Egypt. So, he ditched the entire pantheon, including Ra, Osiris, and all those guys who'd been worshipped for thousands of years and said, "From now on, everyone worships this one sun disk. His name's Aten. Cool? Cool." He shut down temples, erased old gods, and forced everyone to move to his brand new capital city in the middle of the desert. Guess how that went? Yeah, horribly. People starved, priests revolted, and Egypt's economy imploded. The second he died, the old gods came back faster than a Windows update. Even his name was wiped from monuments, the ancient Egyptian version of delete from history. And sliding into number 7, it's the Ottoman Empire's coffee ban. Yes, coffee. In the 1600s, Sultan Murad IV decided coffee made people rebellious. To be fair, he wasn't totally wrong. Caffeine does make you argue more passionately. But instead of, regulating it, he banned it. Publicly drinking coffee became punishable by death. The Sultan would roam the streets in disguise, literally beheading people mid-sip. So how'd that work out? The empire didn't calm down, it just got sneakier. Underground coffee houses popped up everywhere, turning into hubs for political gossip. Banning caffeine basically created the first secret Twitter. Murad thought he was saving his empire from unrest, he actually brewed it stronger. Moving to number 8, we have the British Empire's Let's Tax the Colonies into Oblivion plan. After the 7 Years' War, Britain was broke. The king and parliament thought, easy fix, just tax the American colonies more. Cue the Stamp Act, Sugar Act, and the worst PR campaign in history. Colonists freaked out, dumped tea in the harbor, and boom, the American Revolution. In less than a decade, Britain lost an entire continent because they couldn't resist the urge to nickel and dime their subjects. They thought they were tightening control, they accidentally invented the United States. Smooth move, Your Majesty. At number 9, we're sailing back in time and into a volcano. Literally. The Minoan civilization of Crete, one of the earliest great cultures of Europe, built palaces, art, plumbing, the works. But they also built everything right next to a supervolcano on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. When it erupted around 1600 BCE, it caused earthquakes, tsunamis, and ash clouds that darkened the sky for years. The Minoans, for some reason, thought rebuilding on the same unstable region was a solid idea. Spoiler: it wasn't. The eruption crippled their trade, destroyed harvests, and opened the door for the Mycenaeans to conquer them. So yeah, they literally fell because of bad real estate choices. And now, number 10. Where arrogance takes center stage, the Roman Empire's "we're too big to fail" moment. At its peak, Rome controlled 3 continents, had a professional army, advanced engineering, and more baths than Starbucks. But instead of maintaining that, the emperors decided to go full chaos mode, constant civil wars, corruption, and luxury spending. Emperor Commodus renamed Rome after himself, threw gladiator matches where he fought crippled slaves, and thought he was Hercules. When he died, the empire collapsed into political meltdown. A few centuries later, barbarians walked right through the gates. Why? Because Rome spent more time arguing about who wore the best toga than defending its borders. By now, you'd think humanity learned something about overconfidence. Spoiler alert, we didn't. Because up next, we've got empires losing wars to weather, monks starting rebellions with hammers, and one king who literally turned his empire into an open-air zoo. If you think these first 10 were dumb, buckle up. History's about to go full. What were they thinking? Mode. Alright, 10 catastrophes in, and humanity's track record is already looking like a highlight reel of bad decisions. But if you thought it couldn't get worse, oh, sweet summer child number 11 is about to prove that sometimes one person's ego can nuke an entire dynasty. That person is Louis XVI of France, the king who looked at a revolution forming outside his window and said, "Nah, it'll blow over." Spoiler: it did not. In the 1780 seconds, France was broke from fighting wars and throwing parties. The peasants were starving, and bread cost more than a month's wages. The solution? The king raised taxes on the poor and none on the nobles. When the people protested, he locked the doors of the estate's general meeting like a petulant kid saying, "My kingdom, my rules." Next thing you know, the guillotine industry is booming. Marie Antoinette allegedly says, "Let them eat cake." She probably didn't, but the PR damage was done. Louis finally tries to flee the country, dressed like a servant, gets caught, of course, and loses not just his head, but his empire. France thought divine monarchy was eternal. Turns out, heads aren't. Moving to number 12. And speaking of divine stupidity, let's talk about Pope Urban II and the First Crusade. In 1095, the Pope decided to unite Europe by convincing everyone to go liberate Jerusalem, which sounded great until tens of thousands of peasants, knights, and opportunists marched across continents with zero plan, murdering, looting, and starving along the way. The Crusades ended up being a centuries-long bloodbath that bankrupted kingdoms, fueled endless wars, and permanently messed up East-West relations. The best part? Jerusalem was captured, lost, captured again like a really violent game of musical chairs. Urban II thought he was saving souls. He mostly just created medieval chaos on subscription. At number 13, we're going imperial again, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Now, in fairness, the Japanese Empire was powerful, industrial, and ambitious. But attacking the U.S.? That's like poking a bear that owns nukes. Japan's plan was to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet so America would sue for peace. Instead, they woke up an angry industrial giant that went from isolationist to full Avengers assemble in one morning. 4 years later, 2 atomic bombs later, Japan surrendered unconditionally. Their empire dissolved, their cities burned, and their military ambitions vanished. Pearl Harbor was meant to be a masterstroke. It became the fastest way in history to lose an empire. Next, number 14, the Holy Roman Empire's 30 Years' War. Imagine an empire so obsessed with religion that it literally kills a third of its own population over it. In 1618, some Protestant nobles threw Catholic officials out a window in Prague because apparently defenestration was the medieval version of tweeting your outrage. That single act spiraled into 3 decades of massacres, famine, and chaos across Central Europe. Towns vanished, economies collapsed, and the Holy Roman Empire emerged so weak it became a political corpse. The emperor wanted religious unity. What he got was Europe saying, "Yeah, let's never do that again." And number 15. The Qing dynasty's "no thanks, we don't need your stupid technology" moment. In the late 1700s, Britain sent diplomats to China, politely offering trade and industrial tech. Emperor Qianlong basically responded, "We have everything we need," which, sure, sounds confident until Britain invented steamships, machine guns, and industrial capitalism. By the time China realized the West had lapped them, the Opium Wars began. Spoiler: losing to a nation selling narcotics isn't a great look. The Qing thought isolation meant strength. It actually meant being a sitting duck in the age of empire. Halfway through, and so far we've got empires destroyed by arrogance, caffeine bans, and volcanic real estate. But trust me, from here on out, the stupid decisions get bigger, bloodier, and sometimes just straight up comedic. Because next, we're heading into the era where emperors thought they were invincible, kings declared war on animals, and one leader's paranoia literally cost him his crown. Welcome back to the world's most disastrous highlight reel, where powerful rulers make choices that even a toddler with a juice box would question. We've hit 15, and you'd think history would slow down on the stupidity. Nope. Buckle up. Number 16 is when an emperor literally trusted a horse more than his advisors. Meet Caligula, Rome's golden boy turned gold-plated disaster. He started off popular, young, charismatic, promising reforms. Then something snapped. Maybe it was the power. Maybe it was the lead in Roman pipes. Maybe both. Soon he declared himself a living god, made people worship his statue, and here's the kicker: tried to make his horse, Incitatus, a consul. Yes, he built the horse a marble stable, fed it oats mixed with gold flakes, and promised to make it a senator. And he was serious. The man turned Rome's Senate into a circus minus the lions, but with just as much blood, because eventually the Praetorian Guard had enough and stabbed him in his own palace. Rome survived, but barely. When your empire's biggest decision-maker is a guy who debates with livestock, maybe it's time to rethink leadership. Now, number 17. The British Raj's Bengal famine of 1943. Britain was fighting World War II, and India was one of its colonies. When Japanese forces threatened nearby Burma, British authorities panicked, so they started scorched earth tactics in eastern India, destroying rice stalks and boats so Japan couldn't use them. Problem: Japan never invaded, but millions of Indians starved. To make it worse, Winston Churchill refused to divert grain ships because Indians breed like rabbits. 3 million people died. 3 million. All because an empire cared more about control than survival. Britain thought it was preserving its colony. It ended up sowing the seeds of independence instead. At number 18, we're going way back to the Trojan War, aka how to lose an empire because of a wooden horse. The city of Troy had survived a decade-long siege. 10 years of war, endless bloodshed, gods taking sides, and the Greeks suddenly retreat, leaving behind a giant wooden horse. The Trojans think, "Hey, free art!" and drag it inside. Spoiler, it's full of soldiers. That night, out pop the Greeks, open the gates, and Troy burns. Historians still debate if it happened exactly like that, but if it did, this was the ancient world's dumbest unboxing moment. They thought it was a victory trophy. It was literally a Trojan virus. Sliding into number 19, let's talk about Russia, but not Napoleon's disaster this time. This one's Tsar Nicholas II, the man who managed to lose an empire, a war, and his life in that order. Nicholas ruled during a time when Russia was an empire of peasants, poverty, and vodka-fueled revolution. When World War I started, he joined in despite zero preparation, weak industry, and starving citizens. People begged him to step down, but he doubled down instead, deciding to personally lead the army despite no military experience. Meanwhile, his wife back home started listening to a holy man named Rasputin, the guy who looked like a wizard and acted like a mafia therapist. Scandals exploded, food vanished, soldiers mutinied, and within a few years, revolution. Nicholas abdicated, got imprisoned, and later executed with his entire family. He thought God chose him. Turns out history didn't. Now for number 20, the kind of historical cell phone that makes your brain hurt. The Mayan Empire's obsession with deforestation. The Mayans were brilliant astronomy, math, architecture, calendars that make your iPhone look lazy. But they had one fatal flaw. They kept chopping down trees to fuel their limestone kilns. No trees meant no rain. No rain meant failed crops. Failed crops meant famine, and the gods didn't answer prayers. Cities were abandoned, wars broke out, and the jungle swallowed everything. It wasn't invaders or disease that killed the Mayans, it was bad environmental planning. Imagine inventing zeros but not realizing cutting down your forest might equal zero civilization. So far, we've watched empires fall because of pride, paranoia, and poor planning. But the final stretch? Oh, it's a masterpiece. Because the next 5 decisions make even Caligula's horse look like a genius senator. We've reached the grand finale, 5 final moments of imperial brain farts, so monumental they could be taught as warnings in every leadership class on Earth. Because if there's one thing history proves, it's that powerful people plus bad judgment equals boom. At number 21, we've got the Soviet Union's Let's Invade Afghanistan master plan. In 1979, the USSR looked at Afghanistan, a rugged, mountainous country that had already chewed up every invader from the Persians to the British and said, "Yeah, we can totally handle that." They couldn't. For nearly a decade, Soviet troops fought guerrilla fighters who literally lived in caves and used the terrain like a cheat code. The U.S. poured in weapons to the rebels, and soon the Soviets were stuck in an endless, bloody quagmire. The cost? Tens of thousands of lives, billions of rubles, and the collapse of national morale. Within a few years, the Soviet Union itself imploded. It wasn't a war, it was a slow-motion suicide note. Moving to number 22, where one man's greed literally erased one of Africa's greatest kingdoms, King Leopold II of Belgium and the Congo Free State. In the late 1800s, Leopold convinced the world he was bringing civilization to Africa. In reality, he turned the Congo into his personal slave camp, torturing and killing millions for rubber. It made him insanely rich and internationally hated. When photos and reports of mutilations spread, global outrage exploded. Belgium was forced to seize the Congo from its own king. Imagine ruling an empire so cruel that your own country cancels you. The Congo never recovered, and Leopold went down as history's most evil business manager. He thought he was building a legacy, he built a horror story. Now number 23, and this one's just cosmic irony. The Spanish Empire's expulsion of the Jews in 1492. The same year Columbus sailed off to find India, Spain decided to kick out all its Jewish citizens who, by the way, were the country's bankers, scientists, and scholars. The logic? Religious purity. The result? Economic collapse. Within months, Spain lost its financial backbone. The people who managed the treasury, trade, and math gone. They thought they were protecting faith. Instead, they protected poverty. To make it worse, most of those exiled Jews were welcomed by the Ottoman Empire, which then prospered. Spain basically gave its brains to a rival. Talk about a bad trade deal. Heading to number 24. The wildest flex of self-destruction in Asian history. The Indian Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar and the fall of the Mughal Empire. By the 1852s, the Mughal dynasty was a shadow of its former glory. Old, powerless, and surrounded by British influence. Then came the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Rebels wanted the emperor to lead them, but Zafar hesitated, writing poetry instead of plans. When he finally agreed, it was too late. The rebellion failed, Delhi was ransacked, and Zafar was exiled to Burma where he died in a damp cell, writing lines like, "Not even 2 yards of land are mine." That one hesitation, that single, royal shrug, ended 300 years of Mughal rule. The empire that built the Taj Mahal ended with a poet whispering to prison walls. And finally, number 25, the all-time gold medal in What Were You Thinking? Hitler's Two-Front War. World War II was already a raging inferno, and Nazi Germany was dominating Western Europe. All Hitler had to do was not attack Russia. But no, ego said otherwise. In 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history, and turned the Eastern Front into a frozen hellscape. German troops marched in summer uniforms, fought over impossible distances, and were smashed by winter and Soviet tanks. The result? Catastrophic losses. D-Day opened in the West, and by 1945, Berlin was a smoking crater. Hitler thought he could conquer the world. Instead, he speedran his own destruction in under 4 years. And there it is, 25 dumbest decisions that destroyed entire empires. From emperors who worshipped horses to kings who bankrupted nations, humanity has an undefeated record in bad timing and worse judgment. So, which one do you think deserves a place in history's Hall of Weird? Drop your pick in the comments, and if your brain's now 10% more confused, hit like and subscribe for more unapologetically weird history from Factopia 25.